Good day, everyone. This is Professor Barry, and I am going over the chapter on Luke today. Today will be an example of when we can't meet virtually, and I am just going to record my Luke lecture. So pay attention to the screen, and you can grab your textbook as well as a um, grab your Bible. Okay, so you can pause this if you need to go grab those things. Check a message. All right, everybody. We're in chapter 7 for the Gospel of Luke. And everybody. So far we've talked about Mark, we've talked about Matthew, and now we're talking about Luke. Make sure that you go back to the synoptic gospel and the synoptic problem, should I say, and make sure that you pay attention to those three synoptic gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and where they pull information from. Luke, the Gospel of Luke. So I'm on page 97 of your book. There's obviously more than one way to study a gospel. In this chapter, when we talk about the book of Luke in chapter 7, in this chapter, we're going to learn a new method of studying, and that's called redaction criticism. Make sure that in the previous chapter, make sure that you pay attention to the word redactor. And a redactor is like an editor. Now, another way and when we talk about redaction criticism, we look at how the material has changed. So, for example, one gospel writer may present the story one way, and another gospel writer may present it a different way. They're telling the same story, but maybe they added more information, or maybe they left some things out. The comparative method is one that I like because it allows you to compare the books to see how they are alike and different. One of the things that I would like you to do is get a story. For example, there could be a particular story that is the same in Matthew and Luke, okay? And then you're going to compare those two stories. We'll do that a little bit later. The book of Luke was written around 85 CE, which is Common Era. And remember when we say Luke, of course we say like the other books, it's attributed to Luke. But we do know that the book of Luke is like a two-part series. So Luke is first, and the same author wrote the book of Acts. So whoever it is has the same style, and they wrote the book of Acts, and that was like the second part of Luke. We're not exactly sure exactly who wrote it. We attribute it to Luke. Luke is known as a physician or as a doctor. He has some type of medical knowledge. But we do know that the author, we'll call him Luke, was a Greek-speaking Christian. In the second century is where we see the attribution to the author of Luke. So now let's go. You may want to pause and go ahead and get your Bible. You may want to pause this video. Go ahead and get your Bible. And we're going to go to Luke chapter 1. Now remember, in the Gospels, some of them have the birth narrative, and some of them don't. Remember, in the book of Matthew, the writer of Matthew used these fulfillment sayings. So it's really interesting how we have this introduction in chapter 1. So I posted it for you. What is Luke really trying to say here? Luke says in the intro, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled. And that word fulfilled is very important because the authors are saying that these things that I'm writing about are fulfilled from the Old Testament. just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. We'll pay attention to that name later, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. There are a couple of things here. Ask yourself, what is Luke trying to say in the introduction? So Luke totally lets us know that that there are Luke totally lets us know that there are some other books, that there are some other accounts that talk about Jesus. But he has a lot of confidence in himself, right? So he says, look, they've been handed down to some eyewitnesses, people who were actually there and watched Jesus, who maybe those who were at the cross. And he said, with all this in mind, he said, I know a lot of people have written things, but I myself, I've carefully investigated everything from the beginning. And he said, I too am going to write my own book, an orderly account. We're going to come to this name Theophilus. Theophilus could have been an individual. We're going to right here, or it could have referred to a group of people. We are really confused. Biblical scholars are kind of confused about exactly who Theophilus is. But here's the key thing. Remember, we said Luke and Acts are written by the same person. Luke and Acts are the only areas where we see the name Theophilus appearing in Luke chapter 1 and in Acts chapter 1. So isn't that interesting? Like we said, we're not exactly sure who Theophilus is, if it was an individual, but we think that Theophilus could be a Gentile person, a non-Jewish person is what Gentile means, and maybe Luke studied with this person. However, through careful research, Luke also tells us, or Theophilus can also mean beloved of God. So maybe it could be a collective group of people. And so whatever it is that, or whoever it is, if it's a group of people or an individual named Theophilus, Luke addresses these writings to the person and says, look, I'm going to write this down so that you know what is true. So Luke's gospel is based on firsthand knowledge, firsthand accounts of what actually was going on in these congregations in the first century. All right. What I want you to do is you can pause this video and go ahead to your Bible. I'm going to pull up mine, and I want you to go to Luke chapter 23. You can pause the video and come back. All right. Luke chapter 23, I want you to go down to verse 4. Luke, who we call the physician, is trying to make several points about Jesus. Once again, the synoptic gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We'll come to John later. But Luke mentions 3 times from Pontius Pilate that Jesus is innocent, 3 times, but we do not get that in the other gospels. Let's look at Luke 23 and 4. Then Pilate announced to the chief priests and the crowd, I find no basis for a charge against this man. That's number 1. Down in verse 14, Pontius Pilate was the individual, like the ruler or the governor that Jesus was brought to because, this whole conspiracy that he was doing wrong. Okay, so he had to like stand before the man named Pontius Pilate. All right, verse 14. Pontius says, you brought me this man as one who was inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him. Second time. And then in verse 22, for the 3rd time he spoke. And Luke's like, I got to add this in here for you to get it. Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore, I will have him punished and then release him. So if you go back to Matthew, you do not find this exchange. You don't find it in Mark either. Now, if we were together, we were going to be doing a group activity where I want you to compare. We're going to do a comparative analysis. So you are going to do it yourself. I want you to pause this video and I want you to go to Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 21. And then you're going to pause it again, and I want you to go to it says group B, but you can go to Matthew 2, 1 through 12. Matthew chapter 2, 1 through 12. And I want you to read these passages, and you are going to compare and contrast the birth narratives of Jesus. I'm curious to see what you find, what is similar and what is different. Which book has the story of the wise men? Where do they find Jesus? And then where is Jesus born in the book of Matthew? And where is Jesus born in the book of Luke? So I want you to do that, pause this, and play around a little bit, see what you can find out. All right, in the book of Luke, I want you to see a few different things here. Mark shows Jesus as an authoritative person, having authority to teach and to heal. Matthew shows Jesus as this new Moses who is fulfilling the law. Remember, Jesus didn't tell them that they had to abandon the law. And when we talk about the law, it's like rules, Jewish rules that they needed to follow. He's like, that's fine, but don't just follow the law and then be beating people up. But in the book of Luke, Jesus's ministry starts off with a sermon in a synagogue that makes the leaders mad, just makes them just really upset. We see in the book of Luke, we see Jesus as a prophet, one who comes to heal, to preach, and to be a spokesperson for God. Luke truly understands that, yes, Jesus is Messiah and is this prophet sent by God to the people. Jesus, yes, can heal them. He can tell them about the future. Jesus is shown in the book of Luke to be concerned about them. Okay. But in Mark's gospel, some of the things that are different in Mark's gospel, Jesus is very quiet. Jesus is silent, should I say, throughout the crucifixion until the very end. But in Luke's gospel, Jesus talks more throughout his crucifixion and shows his concern for others. So I'm going to go down to Luke chapter 23. Luke chapter 23. And I'm going to head down to verse 28. And it says, if you go to 27, it says, a large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Verse 28, Jesus turned and said to them, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children, and so on and so forth. So it shows us that Jesus was so concerned about the people. Okay. But I want you to, if you get a chance, go back to Mark. Go to the book of Mark. Let me see here if I can find it. Go to the book of Mark around chapter, let's see here. I think it's about chapter 15. Go to chapter 15 as Jesus is being brought to Pontius Pilate. Let's see here. Jesus is very silent in the Gospel of Mark. You don't really see him saying much. If you go to Mark 15, head down to verse 16. Verse 21, you see Simon of Cyrene coming in to help carry the cross. Everybody's talking, and Jesus doesn't say much until verse 33. Okay, so I want you to make sure that you take a look at that. You could see those scriptures and see the difference. Make sure that you go back and do that comparative assignment. All right, everybody. I hope that you are reading. Make sure that you read the rest of chapter 7 on the Gospel of Luke.